Hey everyone, Sarah here with sewingpartsonline.com, and today we're going to learn about closures, we're going to learn how to make a buttonhole, and how to install a bunch of different kinds of zippers. So let's get started. So there are as many closures out there as you can possibly think of. Zippers, velcro, snaps, there's a ton. Because of that, we're going to split this episode into two parts. Part one, we're going to be jumping right into zippers. Let's check out the anatomy of a zipper. These are the bottom stoppers. These are the top stoppers. This is the zipper tape, which is usually made out of polyester, but it can be made out of cotton, denim, even rubber. And the tape widths will vary. Some are 5/8, some are 1/2 inch. It'll be labeled on the package. This is a pull tab and slider, which can be plastic, metal, or decorative. And these are the teeth. Sometimes the teeth are plastic, sometimes they're metal, some are coil, sizes like 5mm and 3mm, some are molded, and some are like labeled brass and aluminum. It gets pretty specific. Like I said, there's a rainbow to choose from. Here are the some you're likely to come across as a beginner. This is your standard closed end zipper, pretty basic stuff, all purpose, and very simple to install. There are invisible zippers, which, as is in the name, are hidden within the garment. This is a fashion zipper, though still closed. The tape of the zipper is meant to be seen. Great for like exposed zippers. They're pretty big and fashionable now. This is a separating zipper, which opens up at the bottom, and you commonly see this in like sports coats. So I know this is all so exciting, but I don't want to bore you too much with all the types. So we have a detailed list of all the types of zippers out there on our blog, as well as a couple tips on how to shorten or lengthen them. Just know that a zipper is measured metal to metal. So stopper to stopper, tab to tab, all that jazz. So let's jump in and install some of these bad boys. This is your standard everyday closed zipper, and it is super easy to install. My first attempt at inserting a zipper was done while making a little bag, so that's how we're going to learn. I've got 2 pieces of fabric. I've already zigzag stitched my raw edges and sewn a basting stitch to mark my seam allowance. Later, I can go back and trim along this zigzag stitch if I want. This area is allowed to go into the seam allowance. Anything here and down, so the teeth, cannot be in the seam allowance. The trick to inserting a simple zipper like this is to sew the seam closed with a basting stitch first. What? Sew it closed? Yep, sew it closed. It'll make sense in a minute. Have your right sides together and sew a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, or whatever seam allowance your project calls for. Now press that seam open. Place the zipper into the seam allowance, right sides facing down. The zipper tab and the zipper stopper should not be crossing into the seam allowance basting lines, the ones that we marked earlier. So no teeth in the seam allowance. To secure the zipper in place, grab some double-sided sewing tape. It's the kind that washes away. You can go ahead and place it on both sides and then remove the paper, or you can always hand baste if you want. The trick is to have those teeth lined up in the middle. Try to get it as accurate as you can and press into the tape so that it sticks. Now, if you don't have any double-sided tape, no worries. Grab some painter's tape and just place it across the top. You can totally sew through this stuff. Just make sure to wipe your needle down with an alcohol swab, or even, nail polish remover dipped in a Q-tip or something, to get rid of all that gunk that's left on the needle from the tape. When you install the zipper foot, check your needle position to make sure you aren't going to hit the actual foot. Some machines have a different foot than this, but it's pretty self-explanatory. We have a video on how to use this foot for zippers and other projects, for which I will leave a link in the description below. Machine base the zipper in place. You'll have to start a little bit below the zipper tab because of the bulk, but we'll go back later and fix that. As you get to the end, put your needle down, pivot the fabric so you can sew across the tape. Then needle down again, pivot again, and continue sewing. Again, you'll have to stop sewing a little short of the zipper tab. Now, go ahead and rip out all the tape if that's the method you used. We can flip the fabric over and rip out that basting seam. And you can start to see the little teeth poking out as you rip out that seam. You can open up your zipper. We will be back at the machine sewing on the right side of the fabric. So if you want to use a top stitch needle and some pretty thread, go ahead and get that set up. We'll have our zipper foot right up against those metal teeth, but not obviously sewing through the teeth. I mean, I'm trying to get as close as I can without actually touching the metal. As a beginner, go slowly, take your time, get the feel of it. Now that you get to the bulky zipper tab, lift your needle and your presser foot up just a little bit so that you can sneak that tab past it. This requires a little maneuvering, and once you've got it past, you can line everything back up and just keep on sewing. Again, needle down and pivot, sew across, needle down and pivot again, continue sewing up. Again, try to sneak the tab past that needle, just as you did before. Now you can remove any basting stitches that show on the top, and there you go, a zipper. Now to make this into a little bag, all I need to do is sew these edges together. If we want, we can pop in the end of some straps over by these zipper tabs. See, we're just going to sew right over the strap. Now turn everything right sides out and you're finished. You have installed a standard zipper. Good job. Ah, the invisible zipper, everyone's favorite zipper. You know, it's just like installing a standard zipper, except everything is backwards and nothing makes sense. When I was learning to install the zipper, there were many times where I stopped and thought, wait, what am I doing right now? Because it's kind of confusing, but I'm going to use my experience to help you master this little guy. If you get confused, don't get frustrated, take a break and come back. We'll still be here. This zipper is common because it resembles a regular old seam from the outside. Now, your pattern, if you're using one, will have instructions on where to start the zipper and where to end it. Just a little tip. Patterns are just a tool. They are not the end-all be-all, so use your pattern as a suggestion. If your zipper placement, length, or technique differs from what they say, that's okay. After all, the more you play around, the more you can discover new methods that work for you. Anywho, this pattern wants me to have the bottom of my zipper to start 3 inches below the notch indicated on the pattern. First thing to do when you get your zipper out of the package is to iron out all those wrinkles, but be careful of those plastic teeth. You don't want the iron to touch those because it'll melt them and you'll be very sad. So here we have a simple skirt and an invisible zipper. I know these don't match, but this way you can kind of see everything better. This skirt has a pseudo waistband lining up here. I'm going to sew it in place after I insert my zipper. It'll cover up some of those raw edges, make it look a little neater. This is the right side of the zipper. See, you can't see any coils on this side. And this is the wrong side of the zipper where you can see the coils. The right side of the zipper will face the right side of the fabric. When I was first learning, I had to visualize how the zipper would actually look inserted and kind of work backwards from there. By doing that, I can see the first seam that I need to make. That is step 1. I think to myself, okay, this is the side of the zipper that goes here. And I know this doesn't seem right, but it is. And for some reason, this is the only way it works for me. And I do it every time. I gotta be like, okay, how does this work again? Oh, okay, this is how it works. So this is my first seam. This is what I need to stitch down. So now that I've got half the placement figured out, I need to figure out my seam allowance. I wish the zipper tape was 5/8 of an inch wide to begin with, so I could just line up against the raw edges and be done with it, but it's not. So we're gonna have to do a little measuring. So I use the width of my seam gauge, which is exactly 5/8 of an inch, to figure out where to place the tape so that the coil of the zipper is 5/8 of an inch away from my raw edge. Now this will ultimately leave some of the seam allowance exposed, and that's okay, it's normal. Now up here, I need to make sure my invisible zipper is close to the top, but not all the way up to the top. Most times you'll see a hook and an eye at the very top to kind of close everything in together, make it look nice and neat. So I have a little bit of hangover up here that I'll eventually clip shorter, and then it will be all hidden by that pseudo lining I was telling you about earlier. Now you can put some pins in there to secure everything in place, but with invisible zippers, do yourself a favor and hand baste this into place after you've put all the pins in. Trust me, you will get so much better results if it is hand basted. After it's all basted, I'll do the same thing to the other side of the tape. The tape of the zipper will be facing the raw edge of my fabric. if that makes any sense. And I know this kind of feels like it's backwards. So that's why I do my little test. I'll put the pin in here and kind of zip it up a little bit and say, hey, does this look right? Yeah, that looks right. Okay, then we're good. Then I can pin everything in place and hand baste again. So yes, look at this awesomeness. We are halfway finished. You see how this little tail here is popped out? Flip that little guy up through here and bam, now it's on the inside. Now I'm going to trim this down. If you don't have a lining, use pinking shears to clip this. Now we can go to the machine and install our invisible zipper foot. And yes, you should really get one of these, but a regular zipper foot will do. It's just a little harder. The invisible zipper foot is a simple snap-on with 2 grooves on the bottom. These zipper coils are passed through each of these channels. This is a clear invisible zipper foot. I really like it because I can see everything a bit better. Now the trick is to kind of push that coil to the side so it kind of lays flat. See, on this invisible zipper, there is an area of slight discoloration right by the coils. I use this as a guide when I'm sewing my invisible zipper. It's the perfect place for the stitch, but be careful not to stray too far. If you go too far to one side, you'll end up sewing over the coils. Too far to the other side, and the tape of your zipper will expose. So, not so invisible. I like to use my fingers, like I said, to hold that coil down so I can get into that perfect area of sewing. Now we're going to sew all the way to the start of that skirt seam. Eventually we'll cross these over later, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now let's sew the other side down. See how I'm using my fingers to press that coil a little flat? Some people press these flat at the iron, but I'm too afraid to because I'm afraid I'm going to melt the coils, so I'll just do it at the machine. Again, sewing down until I reach the seam. Yes, we have sewn it in. Now we need to take out those basting stitches and close the bottom. First, pop that little tab through and pull it out of the way. Now here you can see the actual skirt seam and the zipper seam. I'm going to sew a little line to bring those 2 lines together very subtly using my zipper foot. I just need a little tiny stitch to connect them. This stitch acts as a stopper. The zipper won't go past this point. Now I could just cut this off, but I like to keep my zippers intact just in case I ever want to reuse this zipper later, like if I'm going to repurpose the skirt. So I'm just going to sew it into the seam allowance on both sides. That way it's not flopping around in there. Now there are other methods to sew in an invisible zipper. This is just the one that makes the most sense to me. For some reason, it's stuck. Look at that. It works awesome. Exposed zippers are a great way to take advantage of those decorative zipper tapes, the ones with the really cute patterns and colors. Now I'm going to be honest, this one is not very easy. You have to practice a few times to get the technique to really stick. Alrighty, step 1, apply a strip of iron-on interfacing to the wrong side of each piece of fabric. Now step 2, I'm going to insert this decorative zipper. I know nothing matches, but you can really see everything better this way. We're going to mark out some measurements first so we can visualize our zipper and the space it occupies. I like to mark the bottom of the zipper and where the zipper stopper is. For me, landmarks are very helpful. Now we have to figure out the width from the middle of the zipper to the end of the tape and decide how much of that zipper we want to see. I like to see about half of the zipper, which measures to 1/4 inch. So if I want 1/4 inch of my zipper to be seen, then I just need to add that 1/4 inch to my original seam allowance of 5/8, which gives me 7/8 inch, but I hate fractions, so I'm rounding that number to an easy 1 inch. I'll use that 1 inch measurement as my basting stitch. So mark 1 inch from the raw edges, then go straight across and sew using a basting stitch. The orange line is where I actually sewed. Ignore that blue line, that's where I messed up. Now let's take these 2 pieces and place them right sides together. Sew the rest of your fabric together using that 5/8 inch seam allowance with a regular old straight stitch. We're going to cut a diagonal line about 1/2 inch up from where that horizontal orange line is, aka the landmark of our stopper, but do not cut into the stitches. It's really easy to do, so pay close attention. That I just cut into the stitches. Exactly what I said not to do. All right, continuing on. Press these flaps to the sides along the basting stitch and press the seam allowance open down here. The little points will stick up. It's supposed to look like that. We'll get to it later. Time to actually start attaching the zipper. A lot of work just to get to this point, right? So we're looking at the wrong side. We're going to lay the zipper in with the design facing down. Our focus right now is on the metal stopper at the bottom of the zipper. You'll sew across just below the metal stopper using a zipper foot. This is a pretty tight space, so pinch and pin or hand-based. On some machines, this is definitely harder than others. Depending on how well your feed dogs perform, you may have to start and stop and reposition and manually turn the hand wheel. Thankfully, it's only 1 inch. Be sure to backstitch. You want this to be a strong seam. All right, now we are almost finished. Let's turn over our project and work from the front. Now remember all that weird measuring we did in the beginning? Well, it's what allows us to see the zipper's awesome design. We could just top stitch this in place along the zipper, which would be the easy thing to do, but let's just go the difficult route, why don't we? Do you see the seam here? Remember that nice orange line? We're going to sew along that line again. You'll be sewing on the seam allowance, so no stitches will be seen from the front. You can either secure this in place with tape, pins, or hand basting. We've already done a ton of work, so I'm going the easy route with tape. Now flip the fabric over to reveal the seam flap part thing we're going to sew on. Let me just pop in a pin here so you can see what I'm looking at. All right, now let's go to the machine. Because the zipper is zipped up and that big old tab is in the way, you can't start sewing at the top of the zipper. So start your seam past that bulky old zipper tab. We'll stitch the top down later. This is a regular straight stitch. You want it to be nice and secure. And stop sewing at that orange line we sewed earlier, the one that we attached the zipper to those pointy ends. Now do the exact same thing on the other side. Tape or pin it in place and sew along that orange line again with a zipper foot. So that I don't have to switch the sides of my foot, I'm starting at the bottom of the zip and sewing up until I reach the bulky area. Now you can pull that zipper tab down and out of the way so that you can sew the top of the zipper in place. Press the seams for a nice crisp look and you have yourself an exposed zipper. There are a couple other techniques to adding an exposed zipper, some way easier and some requiring pretty much the same amount of work. Colleen from Fashion Sewing Blog has an awesome method of adding exposed zippers to like jeans. It's a little more edgy, but it looks really, really cool. Now, I know this was a lot of information, so if you have any comments or questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section below, or come and visit the sewing community at sewingpartsonline.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/sewingpartsonline, Twitter at sewingparts, Google+, Pinterest, or Instagram. We're everywhere, and be sure to subscribe by hitting that button below for next week's sewing video.